Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, February 13th, 2020. And our top story today, more employers are looking to help their employees with financial wellness. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Anastasia Krimkowski. She's an associate director with Cerulli Associates. Anastasia, welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
So let's talk a little financial wellness. I mean, Cerulli, you all do a tremendous amount of research, and we've had folks on from your organization before on various podcasts and whatnot talking about the latest research. But give us your perspective on what's happening in terms of this very important topic.
Sure. And this is something that we come across a lot in the retirement research practice. And I'll go into how financial wellness really has come to intersect with retirement planning. But even though this phrase has been around for a while, we've probably all heard financial wellness more than once or twice. It's really coming to the forefront as far as importance. And actually in our annual survey of plan sponsors, so the organizations that have benefit programs like 401ks, this was their number one top priority for the first time in 2019. So this is only becoming more and more of an important topic, not just to financial service providers, but also to employers realizing that they need to help their employees out a little bit and make sure they're headed in the right direction.
Well, it's clear looking at the research that your organization provides and also things that are written about in the popular press that people are really struggling, meaning regular Americans really struggling with emergency savings or trying to figure out how to allocate funds. And I got to think financial wellness in your research probably means a lot of things to a lot of different people, right? It probably has a lot of definitions. How are you all defining it? And how are you seeing plan sponsors, employers, and record keepers and people who are in the space define it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you'll hear slightly different answers as to how everyone defines this. At Cerulli Associates, we have kind of a two-pronged definition. One is being able to meet your day-to-day needs, things like you mentioned, emergency savings, being able to pay bills. And then the other thing is more long-term, kind of looking ahead, and that's where you start to think about planning for retirement, maybe planning for children's college expenses, retiree medical planning, and those sorts of longer-term financial concerns. But really, you can only address those once you have your day-to-day situation under control. And so that's something where, as we take a look at asking individuals, what's your primary source of advice, where do you go to for information, we realize that a lot of individuals, particularly pre-retirees in their late 50s, early 60s, don't have any what we would consider official source of advice. They say, well, maybe I'll go to a friend, or I really don't know. And so that's where I think we've realized there's a big gap. And even if maybe high net worth investors are used to working with advisors, a lot of people don't have that kind of relationship. And that's where employers are stepping in and saying, hey, this is something that we can help facilitate to help you plan for both the immediate term and the long term through our benefits programs, and just to get better information more broadly.
A question for you. In terms of the survey, I mean, and you said in your opening comments that this is something that has been discussed for many years. I mean, this is not a new trend. But what do you, just based anecdotally or maybe statistically, what do you base the prioritization of this? I mean, is it something that's being discussed as a result of committee meetings? I mean, what accounts for this increase in terms of priority?
Yeah, I think that it's something that's just more and more being seen as good business. And and we do get into this a little bit when we talk with plan sponsors and say, okay, why? Why is this your top priority? What does that mean for you? And it's not so much about the bottom line. It's actually really not about profitability, like some people or financial service providers think they really might need to drive home a message that this is going to really help your bottom line. We can prove we have a return on investment for this financial wellness program. It's not always about that. It's more about we want our employees to be satisfied. We want to make sure we're offering competitive benefits compared to our peers. We want people to feel that they're ready for retirement, because that's the whole point of offering them a retirement savings plan in the first place. So a lot more of this impetus from plan sponsors is about doing the right thing, having a good company culture, trying to improve employee satisfaction, knowing that when you're less concerned about your finances, you're more likely to be focused at work, you're more likely to show up on time for work and those kinds of things. And even though, yes, I think we can agree, hopefully there's also a return on investment in some sense down the line, that's hard to measure, and it's not all about the bottom line.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, attrition is a hard thing to account for, but certainly if you spend time investing and training an individual, you don't want that person to leave just because they don't have a certain benefit or that they're struggling to make their bills or whatever. I think you're right. It's distracting. One thing I definitely picked up on in your comments, and I want to explore a little bit more. Most Americans, and I've even seen this in a lot of the statistical research that I've read, that most Americans do not have a relationship with their financial advisor. So where do they get their financial information? Are they getting it from newspapers? Are they just getting it haphazardly on the internet? I mean, that sounds to me, Anastasia, a big problem.
It is, because a lot of sources of information might not be reliable, or they certainly have their own bias. And the short and unfortunate answer is a lot of people don't get advice at all or guidance. But what we're seeing is more people turning to their employer, and the 401k provider is also becoming an avenue for some information and guidance. And that's a natural launching off point in the sense that if you have a qualified retirement plan like a 401k, typically everyone is eligible. They're used to receiving communications every now and then from their 401k provider. There are those avenues for communications through email, print, and so on. So that's being increasingly used as a delivery mechanism for information, and inviting participants if they like to learn more about other topics, maybe not immediately related to the 401k plan.
Yeah. Anastasia, I want to go to break, and we come back, we'll talk to Anastasia and learn more about maybe some of the services and things that record keepers, plan sponsors are using to engage participants and support financial wellness. So stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. We're joined this morning by Anastasia Krimpkowski. She's an associate director with Cerulli Associates. Anastasia, thanks so much for sticking around with us this morning.
Great to be here.
So we spent the first segment talking about financial wellness, the buzzwords, what it means, the issue, and that it is a significant issue. Let's talk about some of the solutions. And you're speaking not only with employers and plan sponsors, but you're also speaking with service providers, record keepers, and other third parties. What can you tell us about what you're picking up statistically through the research in terms of solving this problem or addressing this issue?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we are in communication with record keepers. Now it's really the norm where the vast majority of record keepers offer some financial wellness program. The majority even have certain offerings just bundled in the record keeping fee. They consider it really integral to the services they provide. And beyond that, we're seeing that record keepers are addressing more and more topics. Yes, they're used to talking about retirement planning, but now also expanding to things like Social Security, Medicare planning, planning for healthcare expenses in general, and understanding health savings accounts, as well as you mentioned before, emergency savings, maybe student loan repayment, all these really broad topics that have to do with financial planning and wellness, not just taking a focus on, okay, what's going on in your 401k plan? How do you get started investing? It's really becoming much more broad than that. In addition to the record keeper services, this is often something that can be provided by consultants or advisors, coming in often to meet with employees one-on-one or hosting webinars and addressing these issues as well.
Retirement income, we had the passage of the Secure Act, which included some retirement income with like annuity provisions, or at least the perceived safe harbor of adding an annuity. What can you relay in terms of the conversation around decumulation? Is that being added to in terms of this financial wellness discussion? Because you mentioned Social Security, healthcare, emergency savings, all these things being part of that. I got to think that providers are thinking about this as well.
Absolutely, especially because given our demographics with so many baby boomers transitioning into retirement, some of them who maybe didn't have a pension plan or spent the majority of their careers now accumulating in a 401k face really what's probably the most complicated financial point in their lives. How do you convert that to an income? How do you convert that to a paycheck in retirement? And the defined contribution landscape has not been known historically as being very retiree friendly. It's been more accumulation than decumulation focused. Yeah. But as you mentioned with the Secure Act, I think there is an awareness that that retirees need a little bit more support. There are conflicting schools of thought depending on the plan sponsor's benefits philosophy and resources. They want to be the ones keeping those assets in the plan and facilitating retirement income. But we are seeing some cautious but real interest, especially plan sponsors on the larger end of the market who maybe are a little bit more sophisticated, have the resources to do this, maybe even have a legacy pension plan, so they're used to communicating with their retirees. They know how that works, and they are coming forward and saying, yes, we want you to stay in the plan. We can help you do this. We're going to make our distribution options more flexible from a plan document perspective, but also from a product availability perspective. We're going to do a little bit more of that. Even if the plan sponsor can't soup to nuts take care of that, that doesn't mean that you can't have financial wellness programs giving you a little bit of a boost and having those conversations. All right, how do you now convert this accumulated savings from the last 20, 30 years into an actual stream of retirement income?
And I have to think that there is a significant opportunity for third parties. We hear about the Betterments, the SoFis, the Personal Capitals, the Robinhoods of the world. Is it your inclination, just looking at the research, that the record keepers do a great job in engagement, but that there's opportunity outside of the traditional channels to engage people and to bring those services in as like a bolt-on?
Absolutely, and your record keepers might have sometimes more generic information. It depends how involved they are with the day-to-day operations of the plan. So that's where we see sometimes it makes more sense for a consultant or might be a little bit more familiar with the day-to-day operations of the company and their total benefits offerings to come in and have those conversations, facilitated by the employer, of course, to kind of give it a sense of authenticity and say, hey, this is a good source of advice. This isn't just someone coming in trying to sell you something. So yes, that's not to say financial wellness is only coming from record keepers. And I want to mention too that the other thing that's really important here when we think about retirement planning from a financial perspective is just how huge healthcare is, and getting someone who really understands Medicare and understands the potential needs for long-term care, and how do you plan around how much that's going to cost you in retirement. That's really big, and it's almost impossible, I would say, to have an effective conversation about retirement income, retirement lifestyles without talking about retiree healthcare.
Yeah, it's by some estimates, and you've seen probably more than I have, over $300,000 for a couple today. Gosh knows what it's going to be when I retire in 20 or 30 or never years, but it's going to be quite a bit. Anastasia, data. I want to talk a little bit for a couple minutes about data and there's data that's being shared between record keepers and asset managers and these third parties. In your surveys, in your research, is there concern from plan sponsors and participants, individuals, about the sharing of data? We have the GDPR in the European Union. We had the California Privacy Protection Act, CPPA. We had New York State pass something similar. Any concern there from your perspective, or not your perspective, but what you're picking up in research?
Yeah, that's a huge component, and especially with financial wellness, right? Gathering perhaps more and more information about someone's specific situation, you want to make sure that that's kept confidential and that data is used appropriately. So I would say it's twofold. One, there's always the cybersecurity concerns from the perspective of the provider and wanting to make sure that you're not going to get hacked. But the other one we started to call just the creep factor, which is, all right, how much information are you as an individual, really comfortable with sharing, or do you start to feel like someone's spying on you? And that's a little bit separate from cybersecurity. That's a personal preference, but it's also very real. I would point out that cybersecurity is now the number one factor when consultants talk about how they evaluate record keepers. That's rated as the most important factor that they're looking at. So that's really interesting, just how huge cybersecurity is there. But we're starting to now add questions to our survey that goes out to individual plan participants and ask them about the second part, the creep factor, right? At which point are you starting to feel uncomfortable with how much information one firm has about you, or do you feel like they're serving you, they're in your best interest and they're helping provide these more personalized solutions, so you're actually okay with giving that information? And we'll probably have more on that in our next report once we have those survey results.
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to stop. I don't work at Cerulli, but I don't think you're ever going to stop talking about personal information and data. I think that is an issue for many, many, many years to come. We'll be wrestling with that. Last question. Fees have traditionally been towards the top. You have all this litigation going on in the retirement space, and some of it, maybe it's merit-based, some of it may not be. But as a result, plan sponsors have been very focused on fees. What about the fees associated with some of these services? Is that something that's being looked at very closely? So you may have a managed account product, or you may have some other third-party product. Those fees, in addition to the record keeping and some of the other fees that are paid, asset management fees, are those a concern?
I think transparency is the biggest concern, and plan sponsors want to make sure that it's clear what everyone is paying and what they're getting for that fee. For something like a managed account, as you mentioned, I think that leads to some hesitation about setting a costlier option as the default for all of your participants. But less concern about something that individuals opt into if they feel that it's worth it and they understand the services they're getting in exchange for the fees that they're paying. But certainly when it comes to specific investments and choosing an investment menu for the plan, fees are critical. I mean, that's why we've seen this huge movement from active to passively managed, particularly when it comes to target date funds, which are more often than not the default investment option. And there is a lot of fee sensitivity. As you mentioned, the lawsuits, around fiduciary responsibility, that's top of mind for plan sponsors.
Yeah, well, Anastasia, I wish I could talk to you. I wish we could talk to you for hours and hours. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. Thanks so much. We'll certainly have you back. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we will have you back very soon.
Great. Nice to talk to you.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you found it educational and entertaining as well. We try real hard with that. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest that you think we should talk to? Drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
But if you're tired of the same